As soon as they didn't feel the momentum on their side, they crumbled. And in the fourth quarter today, they folded like a cheap lawn chair. They folded like a cheap lawn chair.
There are moments in sports where a single minute can completely rewrite the destiny of an entire franchise, transform a head coach's legacy overnight, and prove beyond a shadow of a doubt whether a generational superstar is truly made of ice or just hyperinflated media hype. When the game clock slowly ticked down to the final 60 seconds inside a packed, deafening arena, the Indiana Fever were staring right into the terrifying abyss of a soul-crushingly embarrassing defeat against the Atlanta Dream. The thick atmosphere inside the building was so dense with anxiety that you could practically hear the collective, pounding heartbeats of thousands of fans sitting in utter disbelief. Stephanie White stood frozen on the sideline, her eyes locked onto the hardwood, watching the intricate tactical playbook she had spent weeks perfecting completely disintegrate under extreme, suffocating physical pressure. Basketball analysts and hypercritical pundits were already sharpening their knives on social media, eagerly waiting for the final horn to blast the coaching staff's rotational decisions, scrutinize the defensive lapses, and highlight the team's ongoing inability to handle brutal, physical defenses. But what absolutely nobody in that arena, including the Atlanta bench celebrating prematurely, had factored in was the unfiltered, instinctual genius of Caitlin Clark when her back is placed squarely against the wall. What went down in those final dramatic seconds didn't just save the game from falling apart. It sent immediate shockwaves through the entire NBA, shattering narrative after narrative and serving a clear, undeniable notice to every opponent in the league that no lead is ever safe when greatness decides to take complete control of the floor. To truly grasp the immense magnitude of those final 60 seconds, you have to rewind and understand the unfathomable amount of pressure that was resting on the shoulders of everyone inside the Indiana Fever organization heading into this high-stakes matchup. When Stephanie White made her high-profile return to lead the Fever, taking over a franchise that had suddenly transformed into the absolute epicenter of the global basketball universe, the expectations weren't just high, they were downright impossible. Stepping onto the sideline to coach a squad anchored by a phenomenon like Caitlin Clark means every single breath you take, every tactical substitution you execute, every out-of-bounds play you draw up, and every defensive scheme you implement is dissected under a high-powered microscopic lens by millions of passionate fans and hypercritical sports commentators across the globe. Coming into this brutal battle against the Atlanta Dream, the narrative surrounding Indiana was reaching a critical tipping point. The media was demanding immediate proof that White's strategic vision could smoothly blend with Clark's lightning-fast, high-octane playmaking style, while keeping the roster completely calm under high-pressure, late-game environments. Indiana was trying to firmly establish themselves as a genuine championship contender, but trying to instill elite chemistry and fluid ball movement against top-tier physical teams takes time, patience, and absolute execution under fire. The psychological weight on the coaching staff was mounting with every failed possession, because dropping a winnable game at home wouldn't just be a minor bump on the regular season stat sheet. It would trigger an endless avalanche of national sports debate, questioning whether the Fever possessed the mental grit required to survive deep into the postseason. Adding fuel to an already burning fire was the deep, undeniable bad blood and intense physical history that exists between the Indiana Fever and the Atlanta Dream. Over the past few seasons, Atlanta has built a ferocious, battle-tested team identity centered on being aggressively physical, relentlessly dirty, and completely unapologetic in their defensive approach. From the very moment the opening tip-off went airborne, Atlanta's defensive blueprint was glaringly obvious to everyone watching. Make Caitlin Clark suffer for every single inch of hardwood she dared to cross. They shoved her on baseline cuts, double-teamed her aggressively the second her sneakers touched the mid-court logo, and made certain that every single drive into the lane ended with hard, punishing body contact on the floor. In previous clashes, this exact same physical playbook had successfully rattled Indiana's composure, leading to chaotic sequences, heated trash-talking exchanges, technical fouls, and viral media controversies, debating whether the officiating crews were doing enough to protect marquee superstars from excessive physical harm. The Atlanta Dream brought that exact same combative, floor warfare energy straight into this game, aggressively flexing after forced turnovers, getting right into the faces of Indiana's young roster, and attempting to drag a smooth basketball game down into an ugly, grueling brawl in the mud. As the opening quarters slowly wore on, Atlanta's relentless strategy appeared to be working to absolute perfection, effectively suffocating Indiana's fluid offensive flow and frustrating their high-powered scoring options. Every single time the Fever attempted to push the pace in transition and generate their signature fast break opportunities, Atlanta's guards would commit tactical, hard fouls or force chaotic tie-ups, completely killing any potential momentum before it could even spark. Stephanie White could be seen pacing up and down the coaching box in visible frustration, frantically barking out offensive adjustments, burning quick timeouts, and searching desperately for a functional lineup combination that could penetrate Atlanta's impenetrable perimeter wall. Clark was clearly getting targeted on every single play, forced to endure a constant barrage of hand checks, unseen grabs, and physical bumps that left her constantly appealing to the officials while trying to keep her team focused. The shot clock was repeatedly forced down into single digits on nearly every single half-court possession, forcing Indiana into taking heavily contested, low-percentage shots as time expired. A suffocating gloom settled over the crowd because everyone sitting in those seats could feel the game gradually slipping away into Atlanta's trap, looking eerily similar to classic upset games, where the heavy favorite gets dragged into deep waters and completely forgets how to play their own brand of basketball. By the midway point of the frantic fourth quarter, a disastrous home defeat felt almost entirely written in stone for the Indiana Fever. A horrifying cascade of unforced turnovers, miscommunicated defensive switches, and missed open jumpers allowed the Atlanta Dream to build a late lead that felt virtually insurmountable, given how slow and agonizing the game pace had become. The home arena fell into an eerie, anxious hush, with thousands of fans staring blankly at the scoreboard, as the remaining minutes drained away like sand through an hourglass. Stephanie White was forced to burn her final precious timeouts in a desperate bid to rally her struggling squad, writing out quick-strike scoring options on her whiteboard with marker-stained hands while trying to inject confidence back into her team's body language. You could literally see the deep physical exhaustion and mental strain carved into the faces of the Fever players as they slowly trudged back onto the court, battered, bruised, and trailing against a ruthless opponent that smelled blood in the water. Press Row was already actively preparing post-game hot takes, ready to publish scathing articles about Indiana's glaring lack of late-game execution, their defensive collapse under pressure, and their lingering inability to handle aggressive, hands-on perimeter physical defenses. It was, without a shadow of a doubt, the absolute darkest moment of the night. A chaotic scenario where lesser teams collapse mentally, surrender to the heavy momentum, and accept an embarrassing defeat. With under 60 seconds left on the game clock, and the entire arena bracing for impact, Indiana found themselves backed into a corner where nothing short of absolute perfection could save them from public humiliation. The ball was tossed inbound to Caitlin Clark, who was immediately met near half-court by a terrifying, blitzing double team designed specifically to force the ball completely out of her hands or induce a panic turnover. But instead of speeding up or throwing a wild, high-risk pass into a sea of arms, Clark displayed a stunning level of ice-cold composure that completely froze the defense. She executed a lightning-fast, jaw-dropping crossover dribble, splitting the two converging defenders with laser precision and exploding directly into the heart of the open paint. Stephanie White was screaming at the top of her lungs from the sideline, waving her arms to urge the entire team to crash the floor and run their secondary options before Atlanta's length could recover. As three blue Atlanta jerseys frantically collapsed into the paint to alter her shot, Clark leaped into the air, absorbed hard mid-air contact, and somehow whipped an impossible, blind turnaround kick-out pass straight into the hands of an open shooter standing at the wing. The ball splashed smoothly through the net, slicing the deficit down to a single possession, and instantly igniting a deafening wall of sound from the crowd that shook the physical foundation of the building. In a matter of 2 seconds, the psychological dynamic inside the arena completely flipped, leaving the Atlanta Dream visibly rattled, and suddenly feeling the immense, crushing weight of a collapsing lead. Atlanta desperately called a timeout to regroup and slow down the rapidly mounting momentum, but the emotional energy had already transformed into an unstoppable, roaring tidal wave in favor of the Fever. Coming back out onto the floor, Atlanta attempted to run a clock-draining offensive possession, but Indiana's defense suddenly unlocked an aggressive, desperate gear that had been completely missing for the previous 39 minutes of play. Every single passing lane was aggressively jumped, every drive was met with a wall of defenders, and the once confident Atlanta guards began looking over their shoulders in visible panic. With the shot clock rapidly ticking down toward zero, a desperate, frantic pass bounced off an outstretched shoe, sending a loose basketball skidding wildly toward the sideline. Without thinking twice, Caitlin Clark hurled her body directly onto the hardwood floor, diving headfirst into a brutal collision to trap the loose ball against her chest, just fractions of a second before an Atlanta defender could reach it. While pinned flat on her stomach on the floor, Clark somehow managed to call a split-second timeout, preserving the single most critical possession of the entire night. The Indiana bench erupted into absolute mayhem, sprinting straight onto the court to lift their superstar off the floor as the crowd exploded into an unprecedented, ear-splitting frenzy. With only seconds remaining on the main game clock and the entire season's narrative hanging precariously in the balance, Stephanie White gathered her team in the huddle for one final, crucial game-planning session. Everyone sitting in the arena, everyone watching at home on national television, and every single player standing on the Atlanta bench knew beyond a shadow of a doubt who was going to take the final shot. Atlanta set up an extreme, aggressive defensive wall, positioning 3 defenders specifically to deny Caitlin Clark any clean touch on the basketball, practically begging any other Indiana player to step up and beat them. But true elite greatness operates on a completely different frequency when the pressure reaches a critical boil. As the referee handed the ball to the inbounded, Clark executed a brilliant, sharp fake cut toward the basket, suddenly reversing her footwork to pop out nearly 7 feet behind the three-point arc to catch the high-lob inbound pass. Before the flying Atlanta defenders could close the gap or get a clean contest on the ball, Clark smoothly rose straight up into her shooting form with total, unwavering confidence. The ball left her fingertips in a soaring, picturesque arc, floating through the bright arena lights as time seemed to stand completely still for thousands of breathless spectators. The ball snapped cleanly through the center of the net with a crisp, echoing swish that sent the entire stadium into pure, unadulterated madness. The sheer, unscripted shock painted across the faces of the Atlanta players was a haunting image that will be replayed on sports highlights for years to come. They had spent 39 grueling minutes dominating the tempo, enforcing their physical dominance, and controlling the scoreboard, only to watch their guaranteed victory vanish into thin air in the span of a few chaotic seconds. The final horn blasted through the roaring arena, as the entire Indiana Fever bench stormed the court in an ecstatic, chaotic mob, completely swarming Caitlin Clark near half-court in a wild, leaping victory pile. Stephanie White stood on the sideline with her hands placed over her head in pure disbelief before letting out a massive, emotional scream of triumph and embracing her assistant coaches. In a mere 60 seconds of pure tactical genius and unshakable execution, Indiana had successfully pulled off one of the most absurd, high-octane escapes in modern basketball history, snatching a legendary victory directly out of the jaws of what seemed like guaranteed disaster. The official box score would simply record another home win, but the deep emotional damage inflicted on their rival was infinitely more catastrophic than a simple mark in the win-loss column. This heart-stopping victory served as undeniable, concrete proof that the high-powered partnership between head coach Stephanie White and Caitlin Clark possesses a terrifying level of late-game lethality that no opponent in the league is truly prepared to deal with. While critics will correctly point out that Indiana still has significant defensive gaps to close and tactical hurdles to jump when facing ultra-physical lineups, they demonstrated that they possess the single most dangerous asset in professional basketball: an absolute, cold-blooded ability to win when everything breaks down. When you have a superstar who can completely flip a lost game upside down in less than a minute, traditional scouting reports and physical defensive strategies become almost completely irrelevant during crunch time. Pundits who were actively preparing to tear down Stephanie White's system were forced to eat their words as the Fever walked off the floor victorious, riding an overwhelming wave of momentum that could alter the entire trajectory of their season. The rest of the basketball world received a loud, terrifying message that reverberated loud and clear. No matter how much you physically punish them, no matter how far behind they fall on the scoreboard, as long as there is time left on the clock, giving Caitlin Clark even an inch of daylight is an absolute, fatal mistake. Looking at the broader picture of Indiana's evolving identity, this thrilling last-minute rescue operation reveals that the mental resilience of this young roster is maturing at a blindingly fast pace under White's leadership. Navigating the unprecedented high-pressure circus that surrounds the team on a daily basis requires a severe level of emotional fortitude that can easily fracture lesser teams from the inside out when adversity hits. Yet, when staring directly at an humiliating home loss against an opponent that was actively taunting them, the Fever didn't turn on each other, lose their tempers, or dissolve into chaotic individual basketball. They stayed locked in, trusted the late-game directives from their new head coach, and executed with lethal efficiency when the lights were at their brightest. It sets up an incredible, compelling narrative for the remainder of the season, leaving basketball fans and opposing coaching staffs with a haunting question that will dominate headlines. If a physical, elite defensive team can play their absolute best game for 39 minutes and still walk away utterly defeated, is there any team in the world that can truly stop Caitlin Clark and the Indiana Fever when everything is on the line? As the post-game highs slowly settled over the stadium, the locker room atmosphere was nothing short of electric, serving as a powerful bonding moment for a team that had undergone so much structural change in such a short period. Stephanie White addressed the media with a quiet, confident smile, acknowledging the massive areas where the team still needs to improve, while praising the relentless, refuse-to-lose spirit of her young core. The physical marks and bruises scattered across Clark's arms were a silent testament to the absolute war she had just endured on the floor. Yet her post-game interviews reflected a player who thrives precisely within that chaotic, high-stakes storm. Opposing defenses will undoubtedly continue to throw physical traps, hard fouls, and relentless pressure at her for the rest of the year. But this game established an impenetrable psychological blueprint for Indiana. It proved that their tactical versatility, combined with an elite, unshakable mental toughness makes them a terrifying draw for anyone in the postseason. When the game transitions into a gritty, down-to-the-wire fight